Good morning, everyone. Please find your breakfast, find your seats, and make yourself comfortable. Welcome to the Nobel Peace Center. Dear State Secretary, dear speakers, dear guests, dear everybody, we are so happy that Save the Children chose to have this seminar here at the Nobel Peace Center. My name is Bjørg Sandkjær. I am Director of Communications here, and on behalf of the whole Peace Center, I want to welcome you warmly and say that we're so happy to have you here, because peace and education is what we're all about at the Nobel Peace Center. We have a very good cooperation with Save the Children, especially around the announcement of the Nobel Peace Prize. So last weekend, they were here together with our educators and educators from the Norwegian Broadcasting, listening to the announcement of the new Nobel Peace Prize. And as soon as we knew the laureate, the Japanese organization Nihon Hidankyo, all the educators started to work on an education program about this year's laureates. And it went live digitally on Monday, 3 days after the announcement, for school children across the world, in Norwegian and in English. And it's already been downloaded hundreds of times. So we know that the Peace Prize and the Peace Prize laureates, they have the power to inspire children and grown-ups across the world. And as you know, there are laureates too who talk about education and who work with education as a tool for peace. We have school children coming to the Nobel Peace Center every day, between 500 and 800 groups every year. And there's one laureate all the children know about, and that is Malala. And I believe that her story is a good example about the power that lies in the Nobel Peace Prize, the power to inspire and the power to lift certain causes up to a level where the whole international community, world leaders, everybody talks about it and understands the importance. Today, the seminar here will be held in the Mandela Room. I don't know if you noticed when you came in that this room is called Mandela. And we have a quote here on the wall: "The best weapon is to sit down and talk." But I guess there is another quote from Mandela that might be even more suitable today. He has also said that the best weapon to use to change the world is education. And I think that could be your inspiration for today. I wish you a very inspiring seminar, and I want to hand over to Gunvor Knag Fylkesnes from Save the Children. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Ingvild, so much for those really inspiring words to start the day with. My name is Gunvor Knag Fylkesnes, as you said. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications in Save the Children Norway. And I also actually, in fact, wanted to start this day with a quote from Malala. And it goes like this: "Why is it that countries which we call strong are so powerful in creating wars, but are so weak in bringing peace? Why is it that giving guns is so easy, but giving books is so hard?" And I think these famous words from Malala couldn't be more relevant than today, because the numbers of conflicts are on the rise, and the investment in military expenditure is on the rise, steep rise, while the investment in conflict prevention and peace has dwindled actually now to the lowest level in 15 years, consisting of only 9.6% of total ODA. And we also know that 1 in 6 children, they live in conflict zones, and that is, children live 50 kilometers or closer to conflict incidents. And we know that the grave violations against children has tripled only since 2010. And these numbers are really shocking and really disturbing. And in addition to that, we see also more attacks on education. We know that there was a 20% increase on attacks on education from 2019 to 2022, with more than 6,000 attacks on schools, both students, teachers, and facilities. That was only in 2021 and 2022. And we know that these last 2 years, we haven't really seen any improvement or going in the even wrong direction. So we are really concerned that these numbers are even rising further. But of course, there are some reasons to be hopeful. Us gathered here to talk about the importance of education for peace gives me hope. But also, we see that in the world today, more than 120 countries have now signed the Safe Schools Declaration. And that is really trying to establish this norm that education should not be a target in conflicts. And we actually see some results. We see that the countries that have signed this declaration, we see a decrease in the military use of schools, while the countries that have not signed, we see an increase. So this tells us that it's so important to continue to push for more countries to sign the Safe Schools Declaration, and not least to implement the declaration. And because we know that education is not only a right that children have, but it's also extremely important if we want to succeed in the SDGs, and also transforming societies into more peaceful societies. And that is also the topic of today. We will explore the relationship between education and peace. What is the link? How important is education for peace? And how can education foster peace in the best possible way? So today we'll meet several really interesting speakers. I'm really happy about all coming up here on stage. We have Laura Frigenti, who is the CEO of Global Partnership for Education. We have also the country director, Xavier Joubert, who's country director of the occupied Palestinian territories for Save the Children. We have the Norwegian State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bjørg Sandkjær, here today. And also we have a second panel with youth politicians from Norway. Sigrid Bjerke, who's the board member of Labour Youth Party. Maria Munkhaug, who's responsible for international affairs in the Youth Conservatives. And Erik Rønhovde, deputy leader of the Young Conservative Democrats. So many speakers here today. So I think it's good that we get started. First question is, what is the relationship between education and peace? And to answer that, to give us all answers, is Laura Frigenti, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Global Partnership for Education, and 30 years of experience in the global development, including 20 years in the World Bank. And the Global Partnership for Education, for those who don't know this, it's the largest education fund in the world, mobilizing $1 billion, affecting 160 million children in 90 countries. And earlier this year, the GPE published together with the Institute of Economics and Peace a paper called Education, a Path to Peaceful Future. So we're really looking forward to hear your keynote, Laura. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gunvor, for the very warm welcome and introduction, and I am so pleased to be here with you today. It is actually, I would say, a humbling experience for me to be here at this Nobel Peace Prize Center, a place that embodies the spirit of visionaries like Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, and Nelson Mandela that was just quoted. People who managed to change the world for the better just using their ideas and their actions, and really, giving us a sense of how you can do that without resorting to violence. At the same time, while it is humbling, it's also a little bit disheartening to be here today at this very time when we are seeing an escalation of unprecedented violence and wars. The Peace Research Institute here in Oslo is telling us that it has been since 1946 that the world has not seen as many armed conflicts going on at the same time as today. The images of that are before our eyes every day in the news, to the point that we are even getting used to that. We don't really see the enormity of what is happening in so many parts of the world that are so close, in a way, in this very globalized world, and still so far away from the very peaceful streets that we have been walking today to be able to come here in this beautiful city of Oslo. The world's many conflicts exact a terrible price, and there are many casualties and many dimensions and many forms of disruption. But the disruption for children is particularly dramatic. It obviously often implies that they are uprooted from their communities, in many cases that they lose their families, their enabling environment, but also that they lose their education. And why is that so important? Because education grounds them through a community, through their community. And losing that is an additional form of stress that is very hard for them to recover from. Education is not just under threat, it is under direct attack. Between 2020 and 2022, more than 5,000 education facilities were targeted in violent attack. In Gaza, and I know that Xavier will be talking about that in his intervention, 90% of the schools have been either destroyed or severely damaged. Pretty much each and every child is out of the education system at the moment as we speak, an entire country. In Ukraine, over 4,000 schools have faced a similar fate. And the fact that we have been able to provide to so many of them remote distance access to education services is by no means a substitution for all the many added things that they get when they are in a classroom with other children, with their friends. The ongoing conflicts around the globe are affecting the education of unprecedented number of children. And I want to talk about the more forgotten war briefly. In Sudan, 17 million children have been cut off from education. That's 90% of the school-age population, 90%. In Yemen, it's 42%, 4.5 million children, so many of them girls. And in Nigeria, 1 out of 3 children are shut out of the country's classroom. And I can continue with Syria, with Myanmar, with Burkina Faso, just to quote a few number of countries. The total number of this is staggering. 250 million children today, in this very moment as we are here, are out of school. This conflict disproportionately affects girls. Girls are almost 2.5 times more likely to be out of school if they live in countries affected by conflict, while young women are nearly 90% more likely to be out of secondary school than their peers in countries not impacted by conflict. Every child denied access to education is a future jeopardized, but the consequences go far beyond the harmful effect on the individual. They reach into the future, sowing the seeds of the next conflict, because education is not only affected by conflict, it is also one of the keys to preventing it. And this is what, in a way, gives us hope, and that's what I really want to talk about today. Research by the Global Partnership for Education and the Institute for Economics and Peace, a think tank in Australia that really specializes on this nexus, highlights a mutually reinforcing link between education and peace. Countries that invest in education not only experience greater stability, but that stability also allows for further investment in education. Nations with higher primary and secondary school completions rate tend to be more peaceful, with those achieving higher secondary completion rates seeing 52% fewer internal conflicts on average. Education also serves as an effective inoculation against radicalization. As we will hear from the experts later today, education plays a critical role in preventing violent extremism. By promoting critical thinking, social emotional learning, and global citizenship, education reduces the risk of radicalization. And I want to pause here a little bit, because one of the things that I have observed in the many schools that I visit when I talk to children or in many very different environments, the one thing that education has the power to do is to make sure that we appreciate diversity in the environment in which we live, in our society, as a richness and not as a threat. And I think that this is something that children often, because of various situations in which they are raised, they come to school with a bias against what is different. What is a different ethnic group? What is a different religious group? What is a different cultural group? And the school is the place where they have that one opportunity to confront different reality and to appreciate the benefit of diversity. And because we all know that what we learn at a very early stage in our life provides us with the lenses that we use to see things through our entire life. If we are able to move beyond the bias, if we are able to embrace diversity, that will be a value that stays with us forever. And we will be able to think with our head when someone will come and tell us, that's your enemy just because that person is different from you, or because he speaks a different language, or because he has a different skin color, or because he has a different religion. You will be able to use your brain and say, that is not my enemy, because we may share common goals. We may share different background, but we can have the same ambition. We can work together and build the same society. And that only comes from school, or very rarely will not come from school. The economic benefits of learning also contribute to the resilience and stability of a country. Globally, one extra year of schooling leads to a 9% increase in hourly earning. Education, particularly for girls, also reduces inequality, a known driver of conflict. Put together, these findings carry a simple message. Every classroom closing is a conflict awaiting to open. This isn't just a theory. It's born out of practice. Take Nepal, for an example. In 2015, Nepal adopted a new constitution, establishing a democracy after a protracted civil war that ended in 2006. Since then, the country has doubled its per capita spending on education, prioritizing better learning outcomes and equitable access. With secondary school completion rates also more than doubling, Nepal has risen 30 places in the Global Peace Ranking since 2008, while its conflict score on the Global Peace Index has improved by over 15%. This stride, supported by $236 million in funding from the Global Partnership for Education, demonstrates the powerful role education plays in fostering peace and reducing conflict. This finding makes one thing clear. Every dollar or every Norwegian krone invested in education is an investment in stability. The former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called education peace building by another name. He said it was the most effective form of defense spending. Yet, the world spends far too little on education in the places that most need to benefit from it. In fact, the 50% of the world's children who live in lower income countries receive just 9% of global education spending. The financing gap to achieve universal quality education is nearly $1 billion per year. Despite this need, official development assistance to education has been declining. From 2020 to 2022, aid to education fell by $2 billion. At the same time, many countries face challenging domestic budget environments, further constraining investment. It is a dire situation. Without urgent action, the world will fail to meet the 4th Sustainable Development Goal, providing a quality education for all by 2030, And this puts in serious jeopardy the possibility of achieving any other of the Sustainable Development Goal, because as we very well know, everything relies on the fact that there are adequate skills to make the Sustainable Development Goal within reach, achievable. And these skills only come from the work of the education sector. Failing to do so will come at the cost of hundreds of millions of children who will lack the skills needed to contribute to society and the economy. And I want to tell you a story. One of these children is Mohammed, enrolled in one of our programs in Yemen, a country that has been affected by a dramatic war that is really impacting a whole generation of children and probably beyond. Last year, when one of our partners met him, he was 10 years old, only a year older than the conflict that has plagued this country for almost a decade. Despite the hardship, Mohammed shared his dream, and he said, even though the school has no electricity, I go, because I just learn something new every day. Someday, I will be a pilot. I am often struck by the contrast between the ambitions of the world and the children we meet at GPE. Mohammed was never known a day of peace in his entire life, asserts with confidence that one day he will be flying above the clouds. Mohammed deserves to realize his dream, but lack of financing and the devastating toll of wars are robbing him and millions of children like him of the chance to reach their full potential. Dear friends and colleagues, we stand at a crossroads. The decisions we make today will determine whether we move towards a future of greater peace and shared prosperity or slide into a deeper state of crisis. Investing in education is among the most effective ways to prevent conflicts before they arise. It is a pathway to stability and prosperity for all. Education fosters understanding, tolerance, and respect, values that are critical for peace to take root. We must prioritize education in our policy decision, in our international aid allocation, and in our national budgets. As the world faces the challenges of climate change, digital transformation, and demographic shifts, education is our greatest hope for a more secure and equitable future. Let us commit to ensuring that every child, no matter where they are born, can access the transformative power of education. Together we can build a world where peace is not a distant aspiration, but a shared reality. The question is not whether we can afford to invest in education. The question is whether we can afford not to do so. Thank you again for gathering here today, and to all those that are following us online. I look forward to engaging in a good discussion with the great panelists that are present here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, so much for those really interesting words and also explaining the relation between education and peace. Now our next speaker will be joining us online. Do we have Miriam here with us? We'll see. Miriam, can you hear us?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Great. So please welcome Miriam Rebani. She's following us on screen. She's an assistant professor of criminal justice at John Jay's College. She's also a researcher with the Van Vollenhof Institute at Leiden University. And since 2015, Professor Rebani has been actively engaged in the field of preventing violent extremism. And she has extensive experience from both academia and international organizations. So really looking forward to hear your thoughts on how education can prevent violent extremism. The floor is yours, Miriam.
Thank you. Assuming everyone can hear me. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It is middle of the night here in New York City, so please bear with me. I will be presenting very quickly on a little bit of data points about leveraging education to counter violent extremism, and hopefully we'll be able to participate in a question period. So I guess it would be it would be valuable to start with a definition of radicalization. And as many of you will know, there is no set definition of radicalization in the literature. And also, amongst various organizations who are working on countering violent extremism, there are various definitions. I guess it's important to point out that regardless of the definition, most most organizations and as well as most scholars would agree that radicalization is a process through which individuals come to adopt extremist ideologies, and that while radicalization in itself does not necessarily lead to violence, it certainly has the potential to. Um, Again, research is not really conclusive on what drives radicalization, but there are some pointers such as social exclusion, lack of opportunity, and political grievances. And these are all things that can certainly be addressed by leveraging education. Um, I'm going to quote a little bit of studies here. There's obviously a bibliography attached to this, and the PowerPoint can certainly be made available to whoever is interested in looking at the data a bit more. But we do know that marginalization increases the likelihood of extremism, with 90% of foreign fighters coming from socially excluded backgrounds. I personally worked with foreign fighters when I worked in Canada in the federal police. And this has also been an experience that I've seen on the ground, which is that a lot of times foreign fighters are those who want to engage in extremist groups are often very socially excluded, or oftentimes they feel excluded because of their experiences in schools or in educational settings. Um, it was said by the speaker before me, there's almost 250 million children globally right now who are experiencing disruption in school because of violent conflict. But also violent conflict or violence in general in schools, as we know in the US, is also a problem. Violence in school is also a problem here. It contributes to dropout rates, but it's also increasing the risk of extremist recruitment. Radicalization is more likely in countries with high inequality and limited access to education. And so we really need to make sure that access to education is enhanced if you want to battle radicalization. And so, why is it important to foster education when we want to counter violent extremism? Well, as it was said, sorry, by the speaker in the introduction, education fosters critical thinking and also offers alternatives to violent ideology. It's also very important to have an inclusive curricula to promote tolerance and civic engagement, as well as reducing the susceptibility to extremist narratives. And so education, we know, plays a role in reducing social grievances and promoting resilience. And there's a few ongoing projects, some that have just finished, some that are ongoing, and some that I've participated in a few years ago now that are still going strong. So there is a project in Finland, for example, to foster critical thinking, where schools use conflict resolutions and peace education to prevent radicalization. There's other projects that I've participated in Canada that are still going on in schools, and also focusing on teaching students how to, use different techniques in conflict resolution that don't resort to violence and don't resort to extremism. You also have the importance of safe learning environments. So obviously providing a safe space in school reduces dropout rates, like I said, and these can contribute to extremism, especially in countries that are economically disadvantaged. But also it builds resilience in youth. And very importantly, fostering female education reduces gender-based violence, but it also empowers women to contribute to peace building. We know that women's engagement in peace building is really key in its success. Another project that I've participated on last year with USOCT was about the protection of soft target in West Africa. And you might think that this is far off from the discussion of education and violent extremism, but it's actually very related. because educational institutions, and particularly in West Africa, are vulnerable targets for extremist attacks, and we know this. They are targeted by extremist groups. And research highlights that terrorist groups are often targeting these educational institutions, not just because they are soft target, but also because it allows them to exploit and to recruit the vulnerable youth. And so strengthening these institutions, you know, making these targets harder to reach, but also, you know, along with that, promoting peace education that can create significant barriers against the recruitment by extremist groups in that area. Right, so three different examples of programs that have run recently or that are still running. So a program by the UNODC in Nigeria, for example, that meant to enhance the teacher training programs to focus on child protection and conflict prevention. That has helped to reduce extremist recruitment by about 30% in the region. Another program run by UNOCT in Burkina Faso. The idea again, and this program is still ongoing. This idea that educational institutions can be under attack or soft target by extremist groups. So this can lead also to school closures, obviously. Um, Implementing education-based counter-radicalization programs can be instrumental in building community trust and resilience, and they become very important tool in fighting extremism. And in Lebanon, this is a program that ran at the university a few years ago. It was an initiative to promote inter-religious dialogue between students from different religious backgrounds. And the idea is that by fostering collaborative efforts, this could also help, reduce radicalization and extremism in the long run, and help students build, trust and relationships across religious backgrounds. So I guess the idea here is that educational institutions could, be the locus of effort to foster critical thinking, but they can also be a safe space for students to exchange, students from different backgrounds. They can also be a place where students can learn how to be resilient against extremism, and they can also be obviously, you know, places where the community can come together and hopefully we can make these educational institutions less vulnerable to extremist groups, especially as soft targets, especially in certain areas of the world, like you said, in West Africa, but in countries that are where educational institutions are regularly targeted by extremist organizations. So there's different ways of doing this. Obviously, to curriculum, like I said, so incorporating things like peace education, human rights, critical thinking. These are all very important skills to learn in a school setting, but they also become very important when we want to prevent radicalization. This can be done through teacher training, so having specialized programs that are designed to equip teachers and professors with skills to recognize early signs of radicalization, for example, but also to intervene into what to do when these early signs are showing up. And then finally, in community engagement, it's really to engage local communities to ensure that schools are reflecting shared values, but also that they foster civic engagement, social resilience. Um, I'll end here with a few recommendations. Um, so I think throughout the key idea is that education is essential in addressing the root cause of extremism through inclusivity, but also through safety, making schools safer. Um, One way is to invest in safe, and inclusive schools to protect vulnerable youth from extremist recruitment. Um, and on the sideline to that, it's given that schools and universities in conflict regions are often targeted by extremist groups, enhancing security and education environment can also significantly reduce youth exposure to extremist narratives. So not just in the curricula, but also in making sure that educational institutions are also safe space for students to learn. Um, Implementing curriculum reforms. So These reforms would have to really emphasize critical thinking, peace education, conflict resolution, for example, and peace education and human rights education should be mandatory in conflict-prone regions, for example. That could be a good recommendations to reduce social grievances, but also to build resistance and resilience to extremist messaging. And finally, to expand a teacher training program to ensure early intervention in cases of radicalization. So just like we have teacher programs to make sure that teachers can recognize early signs of abuse, for example, it's important in certain regions where this is a problem that teachers are able to recognize early signs of radicalizations as well. And finally, to engage communities to build resilience and sustain peace building efforts, because often schools are, the center of community life. And they become very important places for this. I think I'm gonna stop here. I should have think I'm up with my time. So I just want to say thank you. I hope this was informational, and I'll stay in line for a few more minutes in case there are questions or comments at the end of the panel. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you, Miriam, for really making the link clear between how education is really important to address the root causes of extremism. And if you have any question for Miriam, yes, so she'll stay on for a bit in case you have any questions. So now I'm inviting the first panel up on stage. In addition to Laura, please welcome also Bjørg Sandkjær, State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as Xavier Joubert, who's Save the Children's Country Director for the occupied Palestinian territory. Please take a seat. So we'll start with you, Bjørg.
Yes.
Hearing all of this, both sort of the devastating numbers, but also the link, the clear link between education and peace. What are your thoughts, and what role do you think that education can play in fostering peace? And what does Norway do in this regard?
No, thank you. And I think, in a way it's intuitive that education and schools are so important in young people's growth, our education, our development, and in, helping to weave the social fabric that constitutes our societies and our democracies. But we can't base, our policies and our priorities on intuition. So first of all, I'd like to just thank the GPE as well as the professor online for giving us that very solid knowledge base and data that really shows, again, the importance of upholding schools and education, as well as, I can't just free myself from thinking about all the conflicts. You mentioned them, Laura, and, it's a very dramatic backdrop against our discussion, where we know that schools are being attacked in Ukraine, in Palestine, in Sudan, and in other conflict areas that you mentioned. Many of them are areas that we don't talk much about. They don't reach the news, but they certainly do reach the reports, so they reach us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we're trying to see how we can, in the best way possible, respond to all of that. So there are a few things. Norway is very engaged in continuing education within conflict through different initiatives and different partners. We will hear more about that later. I mean, we have GPE, but there's also UNICEF, for example, key partner, as well as civil society. I thought it was interesting, that you mentioned also the Safe Schools Declaration that Norway spearheaded some years back together with Argentina, and that now has more than 100 countries that have signed on to it, and that we see that working politically through getting support for that way of thinking has also been, has achieved results, that it makes a difference when what we do at the UN and the declarations that we can make in bringing other countries on board. So for us, focus within our support for education, also on education in crisis, as well as other, I mean, there were a few topics that came up. For example, young people that feel marginalized if you don't get jobs. So we have focused on not just on general education, but on, well, a few things. School feeding. And if you are a child in a conflict, an area of conflict, school feeding programs are important there as well. We have focused on an area that doesn't come up very much, but is also part of our reducing interpersonal conflict, as well as issues that come up in conflict areas, which is comprehensive sexuality education, which also comes into this, in addition to this more specific education around peace and dialogue and so on. And let me just mention the final importance of making sure that through education young people also get jobs. In the areas we talk about, there are a lot of young people. It's important that education equips them for a labor market that may not even be there. And so vocational training has been an important focus for us as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me stop there so we can listen to others as well.
Thank you, Bjørg. So moving on to Xavier, you have recently been to Gaza, and you're based in the West Bank, and wanted to hear from you a bit more about the situation when it comes to education in the occupied Palestinian territories, and also what your thoughts are in the role education can play when the ceasefire is in place and we see sort of to the future of Palestine. What role can education play there?
Thank you for this relevant question. So yes, I was in Gaza 4 weeks ago. It was very sad and impressive to see the level of destruction. And as you have heard, that the majority of schools have been damaged. We are speaking about 92%. In Gaza, we are also speaking about 680,000 children out of school. The Back to School campaign, initiated by UNRWA and other partners like Save the Children in September, didn't reach the target we expected. We are speaking about 6% of children back to school. And the reality is that the need for reconstruction and rehabilitation of the education sector in Gaza will be massive, enormous, considering the level of damages. But also we need to consider the level of trauma for children, students, teachers and caregivers. And I think the trauma which has been created over the year and is continuing to take place as we speak needs to be well considered. This is crucial for children to go back to school, of course, to learn, play and live. Nevertheless, we have to think about the fact that the majority of people moved from their village of origin 5-7 times. So meaning even if for the day after, what it means exactly, what it means for the next, for the first 6 months after the ceasefire that we all expect, I think it's important to consider the complexities that we will have to manage. On top of that, in a such context, it will be important to focus on quality. It will be quite difficult to have stable education sector for the first quarters, meaning that a gradual plan must be in place, and to success, it's obvious that the level of funding, resource mobilization must change. As of today, I think for 2024, the level of funding mobilization for education in emergency is about 3%. For protection sector, child protection sector, it's a bit more, but generally speaking, it's very difficult for us as Save the Children to mobilize or other organizations working on education protection, which are two sectors very linked. We see that the level of funding is not enough for all the requirements that we have in terms of quality standards. And in a context like Gaza, it will be absolutely necessary to make sure that we have sufficient resources to ensure that the majority of children going back to school. Despite the level of destructions, etc., there are probably some alternatives to ensure that the education sector will be rebuilt.
And how do you think that the educational sector in Gaza and in Palestine overall can help transform to a more peaceful society?
So we know that from speaking with children in crisis and conflict situation, the education is high on their wish list. So meaning it's quite simple to say in this way, but if we don't make all the efforts that we need to make, at the end of the day, we will not ensure that children go back to school, learn, play, and enjoy and have dreams, especially in the context of Gaza. What kind of dreams that you can have after 1 year of war, and you lost your home, you lost your relatives, you are on the move, you live in war zone, or what we call the humanitarian zone, which is 14% of the Gaza Strip territory. So, yeah, I just think that it's also important to engage with the community. This is what we do in many shelters where we have our temporary learning space. And when I was in Gaza, you know, when you visit activities as country director, etc., of course, everything is well organized. But I had the possibility to arrive in certain shelters a bit in advance and stay after the welcome, etc. And I was very shocked by the visible trauma of young people being with us for so recreative activities, and it's difficult to describe, but you know, when you have the possibility to be on the field and so participate to certain activities, and so during the activities you see a certain level of happiness, but the happiness ending after the end of the activity, and you see the real face regards of children. And I have to admit, the last 4 weeks I'm thinking about it. I'm also thinking about the level of destructions that I have seen when I crossed the border from Karen Shalom to Khan Younis. It's about 15 kilometers. And I was very impressed by the level of destruction, just thinking about certain discussions that we have at the humanitarian level with the leadership, with donors, member states, etc., the day after. But what it means the day after, when you see the level of destructions and depressing situation, we need to keep our efforts. It must be done with the right level of funding, the right level of coordination, so within all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just super briefly from you, Xavier, what would be your sort of main message to world leaders, and maybe specifically to Norway, since represented here in the panel?
So Norway and partners needs to work actively to push other states and donors to ensure the education system is a top priority. As I said, it's a sector in many conflicts underfunded, but for Gaza, especially with the catastrophic situation that we face, it's really, really important. I would like to say that maybe not Norway or member states must probably reduce the military expenditures and invest in education of our children around the world. And I think for Gaza, this is absolutely something that I would like to see. On top of that, you have heard the last few days that UNRWA is now, unfortunately, not able to or will not be able to continue its assistance, and it's important the member state continue to advocate, because UNRWA is the backbone of the aid response and lifeline for Palestinian children. And I don't see any organization who will be able to replace what UNRWA have been doing for years. So meaning I'm even a bit surprised that now we would like to advocate for UNRWA being rehabilitated, but we knew the last month the bill will be voted. So meaning, so this is what I would like to mention. And making sure when we speak about education, we also speak about integrating programming as well. We cannot just, so you mentioned school feeding, which is not something that certain donors would like to fund, but I have seen in other contexts, it's really important for attendance at school, but also with the level of vulnerability that we have in Gaza and the one that we will see in the coming quarters, it will be very important to make sure education is not a standalone program. We need to think about child protection, child participation, safeguarding quality, and also so ensuring that schools are safe as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. Turning to you, Laura, could you? There's no doubt that it's super important to keep children in school, also when they are in areas in conflict. Could you explain how GPE is working to ensure that children are in fact in school, also when conflict is raging?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that the first thing is just to make sure that children go back to school or stay in school and go back to school as quickly as possible. And so our first effort is to keep the education system running. And that goes from, in Yemen, a war that I always like to quote, because unfortunately is a forgotten war that has been overshadowed by many other disasters that are more prominent on the media, but has really had dramatic impact on a very large scale. In Yemen, we have been keeping the education system alive. We have been the only organization paying for salaries of teachers for several years, keeping the school open, with particular attention to female teachers, because we know that in that cultural environment, if female teachers are not in school, then parents will pull out the girls out of the school. And so that is really very important and has been at the center of our focus. In other countries like Sudan that I was quoting before, where there has been this massive outflow of people into Chad, another country that has a very fragile situation itself, and so was not in a position to absorb a very large number. We have boosted our work, with Chad to make sure that, they could somehow sustain this almost doubling of the school population with all the challenges that come, because Chad education is in French, Sudan education is in English or in Arabic. They have different textbooks, they have different curricula, so it's not just housing them in the classroom, it is just being able to provide an infrastructure for support. And then in countries where the situation is more dramatic, I think about a case that is also very dear to me, the very welcoming approach that Jordan had to the Syrian refugees that have been there for a very long time, and where, Jordan should be really quoted as a role model for the rest of the world, because rather than keeping the refugees in camps, they have actually opened their society to them, and they have opened their school, a school that was actually making very good progress for the Jordanian children, but that suddenly again found themselves with a doubling population side. And we really decided that, in spite of the fact that for certain classification, Jordan was a kind of a middle-income country, and so wouldn't necessarily be, or shouldn't necessarily be, a top priority for our work, that the context was so unique that really there was need for a strong intervention. And we, first of all, were very happy to welcome Jordan as member of the Global Partnership for Education, and then work with them to strengthen the education system, to make sure that they could avoid the perception that the very good approach that they had in opening up their system would have a pushback from the population, which is what they were feeling, that the Jordanian population were saying, well, it's good to be good, but then that shouldn't be at the expenses of the quality of education that is provided to our own children. So many of these things that we really try to, to tailor to the needs of different contexts, different approaches. Obviously, different countries react with different policy measures to this extreme emergency situation. And I think that one of the things that I took from Professor Rabbani's excellent presentation was that you really shouldn't go for a kind of an abstract design type of solution, that you really, everything starts from the community. Everything starts from the social fabric and the way in which people attitudes, to a conflict, to a crisis, to a shock. And you should start from that and design something on the basis of what you think the society would actually be more welcoming to contribute, to collaborate, to accept. And that's the way in which we work. We start local and then build upwards.
Thank you for those insights. We're actually moving out of, we have a little time left, but I just wanted to ask you one more question, Bjørg, and then move on to the second panel. Hearing all of this and knowing that the investment in peace is going downwards the last 15 years, should peace, including education, be higher up on the agenda for Norway?
I think the global the global situation, the global backdrop with such increased levels of conflict means that we have to rethink very carefully how we engage. We need to engage in conflicts in different ways, and of course prevention is much better than cure. We know that for almost everything that we engage in. So I think we have just meeting here also reminds us of the legacy that Norway has in the area of peace, of conflict resolution, conflict prevention. So it's certainly something that we need to discuss moving forward, how we can engage on that side of the equation that has to do with peace, with conflict resolution, and everything to do with that, including peace education.
Thank you so much. I take with me rethink the word from the State Secretary. And also thank you all for this part of the panel. Laura, you will stay with us together with the young politicians, but thank you especially to Xavier and Bjørg for joining us here today.
I'll see you later. Thank you.
So now we'll shortly move on to the next panel.
Am I supposed to go down?
Yes, and then come up again.
And then up.
Because now, before we invite the young politicians up on stage, we just want to show you a short video on the situation in Ukraine and how students there are handling the situation, going to school despite of conflict. I'm really happy also to see Espen here with us today, who's produced the film. He's sitting here. So enjoy.
b-6 не дорівнює 0. Отже, b не дорівнює 6. Записали. b не дорівнює 0.
24 лютого, десь о 6-5 ранку, мене розбудила бабуся з криками, що почалась війна, вставай. Саме такий яскравий момент, як я пам'ятаю, що скидували авіабомби з літака. Всі почали кричати, дуже сильно струснуло. Насправді ми подумали, що прилетіло в наш будинок. Того будинку, де прилетіло, вже немає. Там просто дві ями.
Що можна в чисельнику винести за дужки тепер? Наші діти пережили дуже глибокий стрес. А зараз ми допомагаємо дітям. Ми проходимо багато курсів по травмопедагогіки. Ми знаємо, як допомогти дітям з панічною атакою. Для нас це часте явище. І під час ведення уроків я помічаю, що той матеріал, який я там декілька років назад розповіла дітям, вони з легкістю запам'ятовували. Тобто ми то вчимося на одній темі.
До війни було більш безпечніше і комфортніше, звісно. І іноді страшно також з того, що вибухи і тривоги, то іноді страшнувато.
У нас у всіх українців на смартфонах стоїть додаток «Тривога».
Якщо тривога настає в школі, треба зібратися та піти у бомбосховище.
Тільки страшно, що тривога може бути, прильот, бо школа – це учебний заклад. По таким місцям часто стріляють зараз.
В дужках залишається 3а мінус b. 3а мінус b скорочується і залишається 27.
А от якби ви пояснювали людям за кордоном, що означає вчитися в Україні під час війни?
Я б сказала, що вам краще вчитися, бо ви не боїтеся вчитися. У вас немає в школі підвалів, в яких ви були вчилися, якщо б у вас над головою щось літало. Тому взагалі складно вчитися. І вони мають зрозуміти, не знаю, чи не зрозуміють, але складно.
So moving on to our second panel with youth politicians, I'd like to welcome Xavier Joubert on stage, who is the board member in the Norwegian Labour Youth Party, Maria Munkhaug, who is responsible for international affairs in the Young Conservatives of Norway, and last but not least, Erik Rønhovde, deputy leader of the Norwegian Young Christian Democrats. And also Laura can join us here as well for this session. So welcome to you all. Just wanted to start off with one sort of general question to you. Hearing all of this, what are your thoughts? Who would like to start?
I can start.
Erik.
Thank you very much for inviting us to this event. It's a highly timely event, I would say, and it's sad to hear the numbers because we know that education is under attack globally. There are many more wars now than just for a few years back, but to hear the numbers is sad, and I truly believe that this should be higher on the political agenda than what it is today, because it's not, I believe, enough. Investing in education, but also foreign aid in general also is something that has to be prioritized more by our politicians.
Thank you, Erik. Maria?
Thank you for the invitation first, and I think this event really shed light on what we should prioritize when it comes to the aid politics in Norway. And my party, the Conservatives in Norway, has had a lot of focus on aid in form of focusing on education, and we had doubled the aid for education when we were in government from 2013 to 2016. So this was a very important field when Erna Solberg was Prime Minister in Norway from my party. So I think this event is very fruitful and important for the aid politics in Norway.
Thank you. Sigrid?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said about this being an important event, especially because we have a time where a lot of people are, a lot of politicians are talking about how we have to prioritize in a different way and have like the most important first and stuff, and that means that we should focus less on aid, which I think is a very dangerous take on our time, because it's more important than ever to also care about the global inequality crisis that we have and global education. And I think that's very important to maintain that focus in a time where a lot of countries are looking more inward.
Thank you. The Labour Party has chosen, though, in government to down prioritize education.
Yeah, and that's
and what are your thoughts on that?
We've been very clear that that's not good enough at all, and that we need to have at least 1% of our economy to go to aid, and that's both the principle of that we're able to do that, and also about a question of decency. When we're one of the richest countries in the world, we should be able to contribute to the global crisis that we have. And I believe that we are going to work hard to change the government there, and the Labour Party has some good text in their program on it, so it's possible. We just have to push for it to be acted upon.
Have an important role there.
Yeah.
Erik and Maria, do you want to respond to that on the priorities from this current government?
Well, I would like to say that, well, there's no doubt that we need increased support to global education and to aid in general, as I said earlier. But I think we're seeing now a sort of a nationalist movement, both in Norway, but also in Europe, where we are more inwardly focused. We are having challenges in our economics, in our economy. And after the COVID pandemic, but the war in Ukraine, and it's understandable that when people are having less money, that we want to invest in our own countries. But I think it's sad that it's the foreign aid that is the first target, that we're cutting the foreign aid first. And we're seeing now, sadly, with the current government, we're not reaching our goal of using 1% of our GNI to foreign aid. And Norway is the second biggest receiver of Norwegian foreign aid. We're using the money in Norway that is supposed to go to the global south and fighting poverty and investing in education. And I think that's worthy of critique. Because I think we have to have two thoughts in our head at the same time, that we can invest in ourselves and use money for our security. We're having Russia in the high north that is a threat to Norway, I believe. And we should invest more money into defense, for example. But that should not go on expense on foreign aid, because there is no contradiction between protecting ourselves and also having a peaceful and stable world around us. And I believe that without education and a hope for a better future, we are likely to see more conflicts. And that will be expensive for all of us. So it is in our interests that we also invest in other parts of the world.
Maria?
Yes, thank you. And I think, first of all, the aid should be effective, and we should be able to show results from the aid we give to other countries. But I also think that we should have some areas where we focus more on aid from Norway, and I think education is one of them. I remember almost 1 year ago I was in Algeria, in the refugee camps for Western Sahara. And in those camps, they have a lot of focus on education for the children in the camps. And that shows that as a child growing up in these refugee camps, you can, in theory and in these camps, actually go to university and college. You can climb the ladder out of the refugee camps and get yourself a life outside of the camps, and also contribute to build up the education system in the camps. And I think I was thinking that that story and what is happening in those camps is so illustrating for what the education aid goes to and how important it is. But I also think that this government demonstrates how easy it is to just down-prioritize education. And the difference between when the government took office in 2021 and now is that a third of the education aid is gone. And I think that is concerning. But I also think that we should have in mind that we should show results, and so we can also see what the aid goes to and how effective it is.
Thank you. So I'll turn to you, Laura. Hearing these youth politicians, what role do you think youth and children can play in shaping the educational programs and aimed at fostering peace, and how can their voices be amplified? How can we make sure that older politicians listens also to the youth?
Well, first of all, let me say that I am excited to be on the panel, with these three true champions for education, and that gives me hope for the future. So I get out of this meeting in very high spirit. Having said that, I think that, traditionally, education programs have been designed by people that knew relatively little of what was actually, which were the factors that had an impact on making education successful, not in organizing the system, but actually in having learning happening in the classroom and having, she mentioned 3 times results, and I was excited to hear that, because that's a very important thing. So what we are all here about is not to have children in the classroom, but is actually to have learning outcomes out of the process. So bringing youth into the equation for us at GPE has been a transformative process, because they are so fresh of having been in the classroom that they know exactly what works, what doesn't, how the systems should be changed, how it should be retooled, and to be able to give them a seat at the table and being able to actually provide those inputs to the to those that actually make decision is a very, very important part of the work that we do. So we are working, we have a network of youth leaders in many countries that are both advocating for education, but that are also actively involved in contributing to the process of transforming the education sector. And I think that that should be strengthened more and more, because these are very relevant inputs. In a way, education is the passport to a better future for the next generation. We have to look at that like that. So nobody better than those that have vested interest in their own future can actually give you an input on what they think work or doesn't work for them.
Thank you. And listening to Laura, what are your thoughts on the questions of the voices of young people fostering the educational system, and also fostering for peace? Any thoughts on that? Eric?
Yeah. Well, I truly believe that all children, they have a right to be heard and to form their own future. And I think it's crucial that you always try to consider the voices of the youth when also shaping educational programs. And we have a good tradition of doing that in Norway. This happens in mostly a peaceful context. But I think especially in areas that are affected by conflict, it is even more important because the younger generations are the one that will live with the consequences of the war for a longer time than the adults. And therefore it's even more important that they are also included in shaping educational programs, but also participating in decision making. I mean, it was mentioned here, Algeria, the refugee camps for Western Sahara. I was there also together with Maria, and we were surprised to see how the younger generation, people in our own age, that were included in decision making in the refugee camps. And I think that stands as an example for also other places in the world that are not as privileged as we are here in Norway.
Thank you. Sigrid?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the cost of not giving children the opportunity for education can be like hard to recognize in a proper way, because children growing up in war and poverty, like in Sudan or Gaza or Ukraine, what opportunities do they have if they don't get access to education and to getting their rights? So I think that's also an important part of why we need to strengthen the aid for education around the world, because we know that the cost of not doing that can be big, but it's not that hard to track always.
Maria?
Yes, you mentioned youth being heard in educational programs, and in Norway we have like a unique way of developing politics. We have youth parties for every party where you can contribute. You have a real voice in the party, but in most of the world you don't have these systems, and especially in, for example, go to Kenya, Nigeria, the youth politicians are 40 plus, and I believe that, and I believe that that is something that is concerning, because the youth doesn't really get to contribute with their voice and doesn't really get to contribute with their meanings with what happens in the country. So we have a very, very good program for the youth parties in Norway, where you normally get engaged when you are like 16, 15 years old.
So I just have one last question to you before we open the floor to the audience, and I want to test an idea on you, a relatively new idea, because what you've heard today, conflicts are rising, there is a decrease in investment in peace, an increased investment in military expenditure. And we've also seen in Parliament a lot of engagement and interest and willingness to invest in this long-term plan for defense. And across all political parties, they all agree that we need to invest more in defense. Save the Children in Norway, we have also proposed that we really need a plan for investment in peace, or a long-term plan for peace. And we have suggested that the government and Parliament should agree on this long-term plan for peace. So we can see also the same engagement and investments and the willingness to invest for peace as we've seen for defense. What are your sort of first thoughts on that idea? Do we need such a long-term plan in Norway? Erik?
I can start by saying, well, yes, it's interesting to see that the support for defense is so big, and I think we as politicians also have to try to communicate differently when we talk about foreign aid, that we are doing this first and foremost in solidarity with other people. It's about human dignity, but we have to try to communicate that this is also in our own interest, and I think it's people are not always getting that. So it's about communication, but the Christian Democrats will always be obligated to global solidarity. But whether it's a plan like you're describing, or rather a general increase in support for peace building, which includes education, is something we haven't decided upon. I can just tell you that. but at least I will guarantee you that our fight for global solidarity will always endure.
Thanks. Sigrid?
Yeah, I agree that we need to talk more about how we're going to get peace in the world. And I was also thinking about what Maria said about youth parties in different parts of the world, because we have cooperated a lot with Fatah Youth, for example, in Palestine, and it's very inspiring to see they maintain a hope for a better future and for peace in their time. And I think it's very important for them to see that they get support from countries like Norway, and that Norway is also prioritizing getting a more stable world. And I think it's important that we take that responsibility as a rich country to also prioritize how to get peace and not just the best defense possible.
Maria?
I think when it comes to investing in defense and peace, I think investing in defense and military is also investing in peace, because when you have a strong military and a strong defense in a country, it is more difficult to actually attack another country when you have a stable, a strong and good military. And for some people it may sound odd, but for me I think it is a very good thing to do because of the world changing and the world getting more difficult and more unstable. So it makes it more difficult to actually take the step to attack. And I think for us in Norway it is more far away to actually think that we can get attacked from, for example, Russia. But I think we should be more prepared. The last 30 years we have been very little prepared. The defense and military have been not prioritized, and it has been built down instead of built up. The countries around us are building walls instead of building bridges. So we have a difficult world and unstable countries around us, and I think we should be prepared of that. And I think that is also something to think about when we talk about peace.
Hopefully this long-term plan for peace can complement the long-term plan for defense. Laura, final words from you before we open the floor to the audience.
Well, I think that, we have spoken a lot about destruction, about crisis, about shock. I actually want to maybe close with something that to me exemplifies how little investment can actually change the life of so many people and bring hope. And I want to tell a story that I have been observing years ago when I had the pleasure of visiting the refugee camp in Zaatari, that I don't know if many of you knows. It's one of the largest refugee camps in Jordan, in the area towards Syria, that hosts like 150,000 people. It's like a city, basically. And I had the pleasure of spending a few days with many people there, including children, in the schools, in this really not particularly attractive school. And still during their break, as we were sitting in this courtyard, just, throwing a few shots on a football and trying to spend some time together, I said, are you guys happy to be here and to be in school? And they said, we are not happy to be here, but we are very happy to be in school. And I said, why are you happy to be in school? And he said, oh, it's just wonderful to know that every day I have to wake up, have my breakfast, and be in school by 8 o'clock. And I said, and why is that normal? Because, I remember that when I was a child, I really didn't want to go to school. And he said, no, because that is normal life. And I think that there is so much about that routine and being able to bring the children back to that routine of normalcy, irrespective of how much they learn and all the other wonderful things that happen in school, etc., etc. But to know that they have gone through a shock, they have gone through a crisis, they have lost everything that they had, in some cases so much big part of their families, but still there is a sense that life can go back to normal if you just wake up, have your breakfast, and have to go to school. And that's magic.
With those final words, thank you, Laura. And now we have a few minutes left for questions and reflections from the audience. Yes, Asai Ho.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for great presentations and panels. My name is Selma Brattberg, and I'm the president of SAI, the Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund. The conversation here today has been focused around school children and primary education, but I have a question about the role of higher education, university students as actors in peace building. Because in a country like Myanmar, for example, where we have partners, we've both seen that students have played a vital role in the resistance against the military junta. We also see that students themselves are key actors in building up digital and alternative learning platforms to provide higher education in a conflict situation. We also see that the partners we work with within higher education right now are focusing on teaching students and preparing them to kind of build back up and take forward a democratic and peaceful society, hopefully one day. And we also see throughout history and today that students are one of the first groups to take to the streets globally when human rights and justice are at stake. In response, they're met with arbitrary arrests, surveillance, killings, and also often the education system itself is used to target these students. For example, they're not getting their diplomas, for example, because they're fighting for a peaceful, democratic and just society. So my question is how, and maybe especially to the youth politicians here, how do you think Norway can work to protect these students and support them in their work? Thank you.
Thank you. Very important points there from Sai. Who wants to start answering? Sigrid?
Yeah, I agree that we have to, that's also really important. We want to strengthen the Student at Risk program, which I think maybe SAI is also a part of, giving more students the opportunity to get the education they can, and strengthen the civil societies around in the countries where we see that is required, because we know that that's also a big part of getting democratic change. And then I know it was the case with the Palestinians this summer, for example, with some students from there that was stopped from getting here to get medicine education. I'm very glad that the government stepped in there and made it possible for the students to come. But of course, there's a lot of countries where we need to get the same sort of actions in place in order to make sure that these people are able to get the education they're going to use to build their countries for a better future. So yeah, I think that's very important. And that's one of the absolute keys to getting countries to become more sustainable.
Do you want to comment?
Well, I can just briefly comment and say that you know, academic freedom is very important, and we see it's under attack in many countries, especially in authoritarian regime. And it's truly right that, you know, we often see that the students are in the front of fighting for justice and human rights. But I think we, as politicians in Norway, that was the question. Politicians in Norway should also try to make it easier for example, exchange students to come to us, but also for Norwegian students to go to other countries, that we can exchange ideas and meet other people from other backgrounds and cultures and religions, and exchanging ideas in that way. So we have to, student exchange programs, I think it's a crucial part of this work that I would like to emphasize.
I think when you see students in opposition of the regime, you can really see the results of actually investing in the education on the ground level, because these students have actually grown up in the country and learned how to show opposition to the regime and to anti-democratic regime, like, for example, Myanmar. And I think it's very important that we, as Norwegian students, I am a student myself, show support for those students and opposition to the regimes. And as Eric said, academic freedom is a very important value that we should protect.
Thank you. Laura, do you want to comment on that? Or?
No, I just want to say that to support what she was saying, if I think about one of the most repressive regime, and it were mainly the girl student in Iran that were in the street demonstrating. And so I think that any ways in which we could give voice, including financing, supporting this movement, making sure that they have a better ability to get organized before in a more formal way. I think that all that is absolutely vital to restoring democracy in many contexts.
Very true. Any more questions? Or are we time is up? I didn't have it.
Sorry about that.
Thank you so much to Maria, Sigrid, Erik, and Laura for joining us, and thank you all for joining us today. I hope you got some more insights, but also feel a little bit more hopeful. So thank you.